Hey guys, welcome to the special edition of Siettmann in Sports. I'm Jimmy Siettmann. Today I'm joined by Dean Randall. We're going to be talking about the differences in millennial sports fans and boomer sports fans and a whole lot of other different stuff. But Dean, let's just start first. What was your first moment that you feel like you fell in love with sports, or what is your first earliest memory of that?
The earliest memory that I can think of would have been the last game of the regular season in '58 when the Dodgers beat the Braves. I think that's what happened. And then the Dodgers went to the World Series and lost to the Yankees. That's the first thing I remember. The next year was Dodgers and White Sox, and I remember I was for the White Sox because my brother was. My brother John he's 6 years older, and he was the sports fan. I remember watching. We were Braves fans. The Milwaukee Braves at the time were the closest team, and we were also Colts fans. I don't know particularly why we ended up being Colts fans, but I was a Colts fan because John was. Mm-hmm. That's the earliest memories. 1960 World Series was a pleasure for me because the Yankees lost. An epic World Series where the Yankees outscored the Pirates 55 runs to 27, but lost 4 games.
No. So, being a Colts fan, did the 1958 NFL championship, was that a big memory for you when they were against the Giants?
I remember the game. I think I may have watched it, but if I did, it didn't make an impression on me. I was 8 at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How was it when the Minnesota Twins became a part of the city and became a team? How was that for you?
I was an instant Twins fan.
Okay.
When the Vikings came to town, it took me about 2 or 3 years for me to change my allegiance from the Colts to the Vikings. But for me, I was an instant Twins fan. And I remember the first game, they beat the Yankees 6-0. Pedro Ramos pitched. Bob Allison and Reno Bertoia hit home runs. Don't check that out because it might all be wrong. But that's what I remember. And since then, I moved to Maryland in '87, right at the end, and I had always liked the Orioles, but they were never my favorite team, but eventually they did become my favorite team. I've been here for 32 years now.
Did you have a favorite player for the Twins when you were growing up?
Initially, it would have been Killebrew. And then when Oliva started playing in '64, he was a rookie. I think that he would have been my favorite Twin then Carew came 3 years later, so it's hard. My favorite Twin was in flux, and for a while my favorite Twin was Kirby Puckett, but after he retired, he became not a very good citizen and really fell from grace in as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, all those guys had excellent careers. Did you have any other favorite players that you had growing up, maybe non-Twins players, whether in baseball or other sports?
My favorite football, basketball, and baseball players all time were Lenny Moore, Elgin Baylor, Roberto Clemente, I almost forgot his name. And I think that Jimmy used the term boomer. I would use the term curmudgeon. I'm 69 years old, and a lot of people my age, we become less, we become less tolerant of change. We want things to stay the way they used to be. Mm-hmm. I've spent a fair amount of time on YouTube watching music videos, and it's common people hear stuff from 60s or 70s and will comment there hasn't been any good music written since then, which is nonsense. The music is different. It's not better or worse, and it should be different. It shouldn't be the same as it always was.
Well, I think that's one of the things is that things are constantly evolving, and sports is not absent of that. What ways do you think that sports has gotten better and changed, and what ways do you wish it kind of was how it was when you were growing up?
I don't like all the self-aggrandizing. I don't like, curmudgeon. I don't like the touchdown celebrations. I like the days and the guy handed the ball to the ref, trotted off the field, and acted like he'd done it before and was going to do it again.
Well, I mean, that's a big thing in baseball now, right?
Oh, yeah.
That there's a big argument. MLB has their whole, we play loud kind of commercials, and they promote that. But then you still have a lot of people within the sport of baseball who are very much against it, whether it's pimping out a home run, the bat flips.
Yeah.
To me, I don't get it because at the end of the day, I think all other sports have kind of already accepted that this is a thing. touchdown celebrations in football. Guys in soccer will take their shirts off if they score a goal. I mean, in hockey, practically the whole team comes onto the ice.
Yeah.
Basketball, I mean, there's all sorts of celebrations. Baseball seems to be the one sport that is kind of behind on that. Maybe it's because baseball has the most old school mentality, but to me, I never get it because we always seem to focus on the batters, but no one ever focuses on the pitcher. If he does a huge fist bump, if he really shows a lot of emotion,
Yeah.
you don't see a lot. I think at the end of the day, I know you're not a fan of it, but these guys are playing at such a high level, high emotions, and what they do is so hard.
It is hard.
So I think they should be able to celebrate. I mean, obviously there's a point where it's over the top. I think when, it's one thing to celebrate what you did. It's another thing to taunt someone.
Yes.
And I think that's the big thing is I think a lot of times with celebrations, they are in good heart. There are some, if you point at someone, if something's obviously directed towards someone, I think that's a little bit tired. But I actually like it because it's like these guys are having fun at the end of the day. I think it's different when it's youth sports, when you're trying to, kind of teach kids. Because at the end of the day, these are professionals. But I don't know. I like celebrations. I think they're fun. I think they bring a thing.
You're a millennial. Of course you do.
What is it that you don't particularly like about them?
Well, the choreographed ones, the touchdown celebrations, to me they just look childish. And I understand that all sports have a big part of it is you're playing with emotion, and when you do something well, it's emotional. I'm just a curmudgeon.
So what do you think is a good way that sports has changed for the better? Whether it's a rule change, you can look at the 3-point line basketball, football with the rule changes about safety with concussions, anything in it, or teams using more data and analytics. What do you think is something that you really like as far as the progression of sports?
I think that's all good stuff. I think that the more analytics they're using in games now makes a lot of sense. I don't think it makes sense to use analytics in lieu of a scouting team.
Yeah.
I think you need to have both, but I think that managers and coaches who ignore the data are ignoring something that's real important.
Well, I mean, that's the thing now, and especially as fans, we have a lot of access to data now.
Yeah.
We've talked about before personally.
Baseballreference.com,
yeah, the
my
baseball
favorite
reference,
website.
and you can, all this stuff is set out there and organized for you. There's obviously statistics that only teams have access to when it comes to really far advanced stuff. But, for someone your age, a lot of people are probably heavily against analytical information, and you seem to at least really embrace a lot of the side of it. And like I said, you spend a lot of time on baseballreference.com. How cool is it to be able to have all that information right in front of you when 20 or 30 years ago, at most, you're probably reading the box score in a newspaper?
When you are an engineer and into numbers, it's wonderful to have all those numbers available to you. In fact, in Baseball Reference, I routinely will cut and paste data into Excel and do some of my own analysis with it. And so I can tell you for certain that in Albert Pujols' first 10 full-time seasons, he was a better hitter than anybody of his age.
Mm.
Do you want to argue with that?
No. I'd say Albert Pujols probably had the best 10 years of almost any player ever.
Certainly in the last 60 years.
While we're on the topic of having, talking about some impactful players, who do you think, in your era of growing up, who do you think is overlooked as one of the better athletes or better players?
Roberto Clemente.
Roberto Clemente.
I think if he had played in New York, his star would be as bright as Mickey Mantle's was. He was an amazing player. Some people have said that he was the best defensive outfielder of the day. I used to read Sport magazine through the 60s, and every issue they would have an extended article called the Sport Special, and one of them was called Roberto Clemente, Man of Paradox. And the author said that Clemente might be the finest player alive. He got a lot of flack and letters to the magazine about that, but he may have been. But how can you tell if this guy's better than that guy? It's not easy to do that.
When it comes to the elite talents, I always think the difference is really minuscule.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're talking about you're really pulling hairs there. With Roberto Clemente, is there any play that he had that stuck out? I mean, a lot of people talk about some of the rocket throws that he had from the outfield. Do you remember anything that really sticks out in your head about that?
Well, there are two things that stick out. One, in the '71 World Series, he did what I came to call the Roberto Clemente spin, where he'd field a ball near the right field line and turn with his back to the infield and throw it to second. I hadn't seen that done before.
Yeah.
It may have been done for a long time. I just hadn't noticed it.
Mm-hmm.
It was maybe in the mid-'60s. It was Pirates against the Dodgers, and Maury Wills was in second base. Somebody hit a routine fly to Clemente. Wills bluffed a move to third. Clemente threw to second. Almost got it into the bag.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that play and was thinking, that guy's really got some confidence. He knows that Wills ain't going to go to third on him.
Yeah. No, Clemente, not only one of the greatest baseball players of all time, but one of the greatest humanitarians as well too, and obviously had a treasure. You mentioned Elgin Baylor.
Yes.
Do you think he gets overlooked sometimes in the conversation when it comes to some of the best basketball players?
I think if he'd played 10 years later, he would be. My sense is that Elgin Baylor and Julius Erving were pretty much the same player.
Mm-hmm.
And Irving came along 10 years later when there was a lot more media coverage. And I think that if Baylor had played 10 years later, he would have gotten a lot more of it. Plus, his career ended early because of his bad knees.
Yeah. What do you think about the way that we consume sports media now? I mean, there's a blog for everything, sports talk radio 24/7, TV 24/7, compared to how it was when you were growing up, where you probably basically just had the newspaper and then also listened to games on radio.
Yeah.
What do you think about? I mean, there seems to be so much how you can watch every single game. What do you think about how we consume sports media now?
You can spend an awful lot of time doing that, and also spend a lot of time on the internet looking at articles, and then at the end you think, am I really spending my time wisely reading all this stuff? Because
I mean, I think it is.
I keep doing it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the thing is, I always find that I almost can't get enough, and maybe that is the millennial and the generation of me, where
Well, you're also trying to make a living at it.
Yeah, no, definitely. But even before, I mean, just growing up as a teenager, anything I could get my hands on, when it came to from a little kid, I would read every Sports Illustrated, and that's how it started. And then you start to get articles online, and I mean, I think it's really cool because I think we're able to get so many different perspectives now. You used to, maybe if you had a newspaper, you'd have a beat writer for a team and maybe one columnist, and that's kind of the view you would get. And now you can really get a different view on every single thing and get different opinions. And now sometimes it also means that there's going to be people who have opinions. Like they'll say everybody has an opinion now, so maybe there's going to be uninformed ones that are out there. But I actually do think some of the new coverage is good for sports because it allows more information to get out there and more opinions. And I don't know, I'm always excited to read or watch what people have to say for the most part.
Yeah, it's certainly not a bad thing that there's so much more media coverage than there used to be. And, well, we can thank the internet for a lot of that. Another thing I was going to say earlier, I discovered the baseball statistics in the Minneapolis Tribune Sunday paper in either 1960 or 61. And every Sunday during the baseball season, I'd probably spend an hour poring over those columns of numbers. I loved it.
Yeah. Talking about some of the stuff you did growing up, did you listen to baseball on the radio at all?
Oh, yeah. I'm a farm kid, and John and I had portable radios perched to our ears, listening to Twins baseball, Vikings football, Gopher basketball. Did I miss anything? No, that was it. And I remember when I was 10, the Gophers were the national champion in football. I remember when they beat Iowa. Iowa was rated #1, and I was mad at John about something, and I said, I hope Iowa beats Minnesota. Well, I didn't really. And Minnesota did beat them, and they listened to the Twins when they were on the West Coast. We had a 2-story porch on our house, and on the upstairs, my brothers and I slept out there in the summer. And a lot of times when the Twins would be on the West Coast, we'd have the radio on, listen to the game in the dark. And there was something real special about that. And I'd fall asleep with the Twins playing.
There has to be something like incredibly intimate about that. That's different from today. Obviously you have access to, all the games now you can watch on TV, but to have that vivid memory of being in a barn and falling asleep and listening to the radio. I mean, that's something that is truly special about your generation, what you were able to do.
And the thing about baseball, you don't have, in football, you have 22 guys packed pretty much together on the field. And unless you're watching it, you can't visualize where everybody is. But in a baseball game, they say, well, the long drive to left center field. You can imagine the left fielder and the center fielder chasing after the ball and and guys running around base. You can imagine where people would be on the field pretty much completely. You can't do that in football.
Do you truly believe that baseball was made for radio?
I think so. I think I've heard that expressed years ago, and I've always thought that I don't know if it's made for radio, but I think it's the best sport to listen to on the radio.
With how you consume sports now and watching it, do you have any broadcasters now that you have an affinity for?
I really like Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth. There's something about Collinsworth's commentary. It's a little bit more biting than a lot of them have. And I also like Barkley. Barkley is less varnished. And by varnish, I mean it's less sugarcoat on what he says.
Well, the one thing with Charles Barkley, and I think when you watch the Inside the NBA show, is you have to appreciate that you're not going to get the most, analytical, just breakdown of exactly what's happening. But the reason that show has been successful for over 20 years now is because they know who they are and they're comfortable in their own skin. And Charles Barkley, sometimes he spews some bad takes, but he's entertaining.
He is entertaining.
He's entertaining, and I mean he's made almost more of a name off himself now for what he's done after his basketball career than what he did during, which is extremely impressive because Charles Barkley was an incredible basketball player.
Yeah.
Probably one of the best players ever to not win a championship.
Not as good as Baylor, though.
Yeah. So on the topic of kind of some of the greatest basketball players of all time, who do you think are the guys that deserve to be in the discussion when we talk about this guy is the greatest of all time?
First of all, I think it's a fool's errand to pick out one guy and say he's the best ever. Mm-hmm. Jordan told me about somebody who read that said Michael Jordan is the best ever and best that will ever be. Well, that's just stupid. Mm-hmm. But I think that Wilt Chamberlain should be in that discussion. And obviously Jordan, you can make a case for Jabbar, you can make a case for Bill Russell. If you want to count championships, then you have to put Bill Russell in it. I think counting championships, gauging a player's ability by the number of championships his team wins, I think is misguided.
Well, not only that, because if we're to have a fair argument and admit that championships, you can't just use that because there are guys who Robert Horry has 7 championships. It doesn't make him better than Michael Jordan.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and so it's
only a real sports nerd would know that.
Yes, big shot, Robert Horry. I think it's always, and also era matters too. I mean, Bill Russell won 11 championships in an era where he pretty much had a very stacked team at the time.
And I think there were probably 10 or maybe 12 teams in the league then.
And there wasn't really any player movement either. And
right.
So it was hard to get better. Some of the best basketball players weren't always even going to the NBA at that time. And so that's the other thing is you always have to adjust things for era because, whether, especially for basketball, how the game is played now versus how it used to be played, you have to look at how good are those players, how good were those players then, how good would they be now, and vice versa, and also just how dominant were they in their era that they played in. And really, that's the thing is when you look at a guy like Wilt Chamberlain, I always think it's interesting that some people don't believe that he would have been that good of a player or as dominant. And obviously he put up numbers that were ridiculous. But I truly believe with the kind of athlete that Wilt Chamberlain was, if he had modern day medicine and all that, he could step into today's NBA and be easily one of the best players. And that's one thing. I think Wilt Chamberlain gets underlooked a lot because he played in the era with Bill Russell. And, as far as his career goes, he doesn't have that, stacked resume of championships.
Someone, and it may have been Chamberlain who said this, it may have been someone else who said this, nobody ever rooted for Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
And in Chamberlain's day, he was Goliath.
Yeah.
And he was an amazing athlete. Hurdles, high jump, triple jump. He was amazing. But he couldn't shoot free throws.
Well, I think we've talked about this before. Does it really bother you when guys can't shoot free throws?
Yes, it does. To me, the most manly thing in the game of basketball is making your damn free throws. Now, forget all the dunks. They're 2 points. Well, making free throws or not making free throws has been the difference in many a win and loss.
Well, and so it's interesting because these guys practice free throws all the time.
I assume so.
In fact, there are always stories of a guy like Dwight Howard who he would shoot like 200, 300 a day and make 90% of them in practice. But it's different when you're in a game. It's different when you're running up and down the floor.
Oh, yeah.
You got to stop everything you're doing and shoot the true free throws. I do think it's actually underrated. One of the hardest things in sports to do is to be a consistent free throw shooter, because there are some really good players who were not good free throw shooters.
Yeah.
Especially, I think the taller you are.
LeBron now is one of those players who's really good, but is having trouble with his free throwing.
Yeah. What do you think about LeBron and his legacy? Obviously,
I think he's an amazing player, and I think he's the best player of his day. Whether this best player ever, again, who knows? The thing that he brings to the table that Jordan did not bring to the table was assists. Now, LeBron can pass, and I don't think anybody ever lauded Jordan for his passing.
No, I mean there was definitely people who lauded him for his playmaking, but yeah. I mean it's in my opinion that LeBron's one of like the best 5 passers of all time. Like I think what he's able to do when he's locked in. I mean this year he's actually leading the league in assists. It's a small sample size,
yes.
But he also was always really good at like hockey assists too. Getting the ball, swinging the ball to someone who then is going to get the assist. Because you see with his teams, it's all about spacing, all about having shooters around him. And I think his basketball IQ is really off the charts. And that's the big thing is that maybe unlike a Michael Jordan, maybe unlike a Kobe Bryant, he's going to try to make the right basketball play every time. And that's become controversial in his career because everyone kind of fell in love with that Jordan type of, no matter what, I'm going to take the last shot. Yeah. I'm going to, it doesn't matter how contested it is. And whether that opinion is right or wrong, I can't really comment on it. But it's definitely been something that with LeBron that people have criticized him for, that he is willing to pass off for maybe the last shot of the game or for a really important possession.
I think it's unfortunate to criticize people for being too much of a team player. I heard that said about Kevin Garnett once when he was, I think it was his MVP year with the Timberwolves. Mm-hmm. And somebody had said, well, the knock on him was he's not selfish enough. And I thought, that's not a bad thing. On the other hand, there are times and you need to just say, the ball is mine, I'm taking over. There are times and that's the appropriate thing to do. I don't know when those times are, but.
And that's truly like a feel for the game type of thing. Yeah. And people do appreciate that mentality, that kind of killer mentality, and different stars have different mentalities. Some guys have that Michael Jordan approach or Kobe Bryant approach where it's like, get the hell out of my way and let me go score, and some guys don't. I think both can be successful.
Yeah.
Just as, you can have a guy who is a huge rah-rah guy, like a Ray Lewis, and you can also have someone else who's very stoic, and both can be, extremely good at what they do. I think sometimes we fit molds on this is what a good coach looks like, this is what a good player looks like, and we don't necessarily think about, they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You were talking about dunking earlier.
It's 2 points.
Well,
you can do a 360, a pirouette, and throw everything but your sneakers through the hoop. It's still 2 points.
Well, I mean, so in football is a 99-yard run to 6 points compared to a 1-yard run, but one's obviously more impressive.
To me, hitting a three-point shot like Steph Curry, about 50 feet out from the basket, putting up a three-point shot and drilling it and acting like, yeah, I do that every time.
Well, I mean, here's the thing about dunking. Like there's
Steph Curry is never out of range.
no that he is always in range, no matter where he is, 96 feet on the floor. But
94.
94. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. All right, thank you for correcting me. No, but dunking is one of the most exciting things in sports. Like especially if you have the ability to posterize someone, and it really gets. I mean, think about this. Fans will get excited when a three-point shot is made, but when someone is able to just dunk the ball against someone's face, I mean, that is. It is a very. It's almost like kind of a little like of a barbaric type thing. It just gets people excited, and the whole team gets excited. People come off the bench, and a big dunk is, I think, one of the most exciting plays of all sports because it also shows off the pure athleticism that these guys have, especially in the NBA.
Yeah, look at 6-foot Russell Westbrook and what he can do. I mean, that's athleticism. That's amazing.
And he's tailed off a little bit, but he's still just like an incredible athlete.
He's gotten older. He probably doesn't have a 50-inch vertical jump anymore. It's probably down to 45.
He's had a couple of knee surgeries, but it's been impressive to see what he's been able to still do in his career with his athleticism because his game is so reliant on his athleticism.
Yeah.
Are there current guys in the NBA that you really like now? You mentioned Steph Curry. Is there anybody else that you really like?
I've never been that hot on Steph Curry.
Okay.
I think he's an amazing shooter. I don't know how he is as a basketball. I mean, you don't see him getting lots of assists. Well, that's because they want him to shoot.
Well, also, I think the Warriors are much more of a. You see a lot of guys get assists when they're ball dominant kind of point guard types, where they kind of control where the ball goes. You're Rajon Rondo type of guy, and then you have Steph. And the whole Warrior system was that they pass more than any team in the NBA, and then also, I mean, a lot of times for them you have Draymond, who kind of plays kind of a point forward role too.
Who?
Draymond Green.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a guy coming out of college that did a whole lot more than I ever expected him to. Of all the players coming out of Michigan State, well, obviously Magic Johnson was the best, but I'd say Draymond Green is the second best of the players that came out of Michigan State.
Yeah.
I don't know if people saw that coming, but I certainly didn't.
No, I mean, for him to be maybe the best defensive player in the league, and what makes him so great is that during that Warriors run, he was able to play center, play the five. He's 6'6", 6'7", but he has an extremely long wingspan, and I mean, he can guard anyone. And in the modern day of basketball, being able to guard 1 through 5 and how good he is defensively and his basketball IQ, another guy whose basketball IQ is just off the charts, it's incredibly impressive. With Curry, though, I mean, to me, what separates him as one of the best is that he's not only a great shooter, he's easily, I think, the best shooter off the dribble in NBA history.
I wouldn't argue that.
I mean, because I think a lot of the best shooters, I mean, Reggie Miller was decent off the dribble. Ray Allen was known more as a shooter at the end of his career, but he was able to do a lot. Ray Allen.
Oh, yeah.
Was able to do a lot early on in his career. But, I mean, Steph Curry, I mean, he truly has changed the game because kids, used to want to be the high-flying dunkers and stuff like that. Now, if you go to a park or you go to, watch kids play basketball, they all want to shoot threes.
Oh, of course.
They all want to hit
I don't think that's a change. When I was a kid, I wanted to shoot outside. Don't worry about working on making layups. Shoot those 15 or 20 footers, the ones that you can barely get the ball to the basket.
And now it's like 30 or 35 footers. Yeah. No, I truly think that Curry, especially with the rise of the three-point shot and his efficiency from it, I mean, the game was already trending in that direction, but he definitely took it to another level. What do you think about the game trending toward way more three-point shots? I mean, you have a team in the Rockets last year who were the first team ever to average 53 three-point attempts a game. Now, almost every team in the league is going to average at least 40 this year. What do you think of it? Because the game was a lot different. When you were growing up, not only was there no three-point line, but even when it was first implemented, teams were very wary to use it. But now we've kind of gotten to a point where
They
the
weren't
math says it's in favor. But is there a point where you're taking too many?
Not if you keep winning.
No.
I mean, the Game 7 conference final between the Warriors and the Rockets 2 years ago. The Rockets ended up losing the game, I think, by 9 points. They went through a stretch where they missed 27 consecutive three-pointers.
Yep.
That's just off the charts unlikely. That's like a 1 in a million.
Yeah, I mean, if they would have made 3 or 4, which would have been a terrible percentage, still, they would. I mean, and I remember watching it live at the time, and it almost felt like if they just see the ball going once, then it's going to start to fall.
Yeah.
And because that's how they play too, it took. I didn't realize it until someone mentioned it on the broadcast that they had missed 20 straight. I mean, you know that they had been struggling, and the crazy thing is they were in that game too.
Yeah.
They were leading at halftime, and this is the Golden State team that had Kevin Durant, that was fully healthy, and they're like, the Rockets may beat them, and this is all without Chris Paul too.
Yes.
Because they had went up 3-2, but he had hurt his hamstring, and the Rockets were really the one team during that, while the Warriors had Kevin Durant healthy, that was able to really push them.
Yeah. As far as I think it'd be good if they moved the line back some. I saw some research that somebody had done on that a couple of months ago about the various shooting percentages. That's one of the beauties of analytics. You know if the guy shot from 22 feet or 23 feet.
Yeah.
And there you could see a clear improving of the percentage as they got closer to the current three-point line. And somebody had suggested that it should be different places for different arenas because the different teams have different three-point abilities. But I like the idea of moving it back, but I still think a three-point shot, they use it because it helps you win games.
Yeah, and if you're able to shoot it, at basically above a 35% clip, I mean you're the math is working in your favor, and I agree with you. I think the line should be moved back because I think not only the thing that teams take advantage of the most now are corner threes, which is the shortest three there is.
Yeah.
And you just gotta have guys that are parked out there, and we have a lot of guys in the league who are shooting above 50% on corner threes, which is incredible. I mean, that you talk about efficiency. I mean, the two most efficient shots in basketball right now are a layup or a dunk, and then a corner three.
Yeah.
Because of the output that it's able to give you. I do agree. I think the line should be moved back just because I think guys are really starting to really get good at it, especially because you see, you talk about how it's practice when you're a kid shooting outside shots.
Sure.
I think these days you're even seeing guys who are playing center in AAU basketball taking a bunch of threes.
Yeah.
And these guys are good at it.
Yep. Sam Perkins was 7-foot center, and he was a pretty good three-point shooter. Karl Anthony Towns now. Well, Frank Kaminsky, when he was playing for Wisconsin, a really good three-point shooter, 7-footer.
Yeah. There's a little bit of like a renaissance of kind of like the big man in basketball now with some of the guys. You have Joel Embiid, you have Karl Anthony Towns, who I just think is amazing offensively. And you have guys like Nikola Jokic. They're a little bit more multifaceted, though. It's not just put your back to the basket. What do you think about kind of the change in the style of play of big men? Because obviously, for a long time in basketball, you had to have a really good big guy to win the championship. And now it seems like the league is way more wing focused. If you look at who are the best players who win on championships, do you think can still be a time where the best player on a team can be a center?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, was Tim Duncan a center? He was a power forward. Well, sometimes he was
Both,
a center.
yeah, depending on what you want to be.
He was pretty good. Kevin Garnett was pretty much very similar player, it seems, although from what I've gathered, Kevin Garnett was much more of a jerk than Tim Duncan. But as their playing is concerned, I think they were pretty much the same guy.
Yeah, both excellent guys. What are some of the most impactful sports moments you think in history?
The Miracle on Ice was a big one, that's for sure.
Do you remember watching that?
I watched that. I was in my friend's house, Tim House. I was at his house watching it. I didn't have a television at the time. And I knew we were going to lose.
Yeah.
And Tim came into the basement sometime during the game and said, I know who wins. Do you want me to tell you? And I said, no, I don't want you to tell me. But I knew we were going to lose.
Yeah.
And then we're ahead, and the seconds are ticking off. Are we going to win? And the horn goes off, and I jumped up and yelled, we won! We won, yes.
Yeah. Well, how big was that at the time? Because that's in the middle of the Cold War. The Soviet team obviously was taking advantage of, these guys were basically professionals.
Oh, yeah.
And they really were truly, it was David versus Goliath.
It really was.
How big at the time, you say that's like your first initial reaction. What was the aftermath of all of that?
A friend, Mark Blasky, a guy I worked with, had gone to Wisconsin. Herb Brooks coached at Minnesota. Mark was a hockey fan. He hated Herb Brooks because, well, Herb Brooks called the Wisconsin fans a bunch of drunks, which they probably were. The morning after that game, Mark came in and said to me, he says, I called my friend yesterday or last night and said, hey, I'm a Herb Brooks fan.
No, that must have been huge at the time. What do you? I think we've talked about this before. Do you think Jackie Robinson making his debut in baseball is up there as well?
How could I forget? I think that was the biggest moment in sports of the 20th century.
No.
And I think it was the single most monumental civil rights event of the 20th century, because this guy was all by himself. He had the weight of his race on his shoulders. Everybody knew what was going on that day, and half the world was hoping he would fail, and half the world was hoping he would succeed. And he was out there all alone. And Rosa Parks didn't have the world watching when she refused to go to the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King always had people working with him. He was never alone. And so that's why I think Robinson's breaking of the color barrier was the single biggest civil rights event of that century.
Yeah, they always talk about how Jackie Robinson wasn't necessarily the best baseball player out of the Negro Leagues, but that he was the guy who could actually break into the big leagues and sustain it, and had the personality. I mean, how tough do you think that was?
I can't imagine. I really can't imagine. I've read I think it was an autobiography that Robinson wrote. I've also read, when I was a kid, I read a lot of sports novels and stuff. And one of them was a book about Robinson. And Branch Rickey was smart. He knew he couldn't get, say, Satchel Paige, because Satchel Paige was a sideshow. He was an amazing pitcher. He may be the best pitcher ever, but there'd be a sideshow with him. He wanted somebody who was educated and somebody who wasn't carousing, because, as he said, if you fail at this, Jack, you're pushing the calendar back 20 years. Mm-hmm. And he needed the right guy, not necessarily the best player.
Well, the incredible thing about Jackie Robinson is he was a great athlete in football, great in baseball, basketball, track. I mean, this guy
lettered in 4 sports in UCLA. His older brother, Mac, was a sprinter, an Olympic teammate of Jesse Owens.
Yeah, I'm just an incredible athlete, and the exact right person to do it. And then we saw in the years later that baseball was able to integrate even more, and to the point where we are now. And I always think sports is beautiful that way, because it was a little bit ahead on the curve when it came to integration, because at the end of the day, Branch Rickey wanted to win.
Yeah.
And that's why he signed Jackie Robinson, is he wanted to get the best players he could. And the great thing about sports to me is that no matter where you're from, your race, your ethnicity, your class, how rich you are, how poor you are, when you step onto a field, a court, or an ice rink, all that matters is your skill. Yep. For the most part. And I really think that's the beautiful part of it. Is there any other impactful moments that you remember? Is there anything that you wish you could have seen live over the years, that you could go back in time for one game or one moment?
Oh, there are probably a lot. Nothing comes to the top of that pile immediately. It's been fun to watch Game 7 of the '91 series, which, in my humble opinion, was the most can't think of the word, dramatic of the series because 4 of the games were won with the last at bat, and 3 of them were in extra innings.
That basically got Jack Morris in the Hall of Fame.
Probably.
I don't think Jack Morris is a Hall of Fame pitcher, but the snapshot of that game, the snapshot memory that people have of that, I think is one of the reasons that he's in the Hall of Fame. Couple few before we go. When it comes to baseball, we've talked about the change in it before. We've talked about the 3 true outcomes. Having a walk, a home run, or a strikeout. So basically, the ball not being put in play. 40, 50 years ago, it was under 20%. This past year, it got up to about 37. Do you think that's a reason for why that there's sometimes a struggle in viewership for baseball?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, remember curmudgeon versus millennial. I don't know what the millennial home.
You think home runs are overrated?
No, no, no. I don't think
you're guaranteed. You're guaranteed a run when you hit a home run.
I don't think home runs are overrated.
Yeah.
But they're not as entertaining as the ball in play. I think the most entertaining play in baseball is a triple. You've got guys running, catching, throwing.
No.
I also, having played not very well outfield in baseball and slow pitch softball, one of my favorite play in baseball is an outfielder throwing out a runner. I love watching outfielders.
Especially from home plate. No, I definitely, because you can go 20, 30 minutes in a game now without the ball being put in play.
Yeah.
And look, I think some of it is the kind of swing that guys have, but also I just think when you guys have almost every reliever out of the bullpen is throwing 95, 96, 97, has nasty stuff. I think that also is the big increase in strikeouts too. And then it's a combination of that. Because I think sometimes people just attribute it to the coaching and how the game is played. But it is truly incredible the kind of stuff that guys have. It used to be that you really wanted to get a starter out of the game.
Yep.
Now for some guys, it's like you want to keep the starter in because his stuff maybe after a couple innings and a couple times through the order is not going to be great. And then you get him out of the game, and now you're facing someone throwing 99 who can throw a slider at 90 and have it whip across the plate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly incredible the kind of stuff that guys have now.
Yeah, I don't like. The thing I don't like about the 3 true outcomes is it's taking action out of the game, and I want to see action. And I think that the reason for the more strikeout, part of the reason for more strikeouts is they're working more to hit home runs. It used to be hitters would back off their swing when they had 2 strikes and just try to get the ball in play. That's not so common anymore. Mm-hmm. And you see a guy like Alex Bregman, who's always choked up an inch or so, which I was surprised to see.
No. And he's still able to produce power, too. I mean, Juan Soto is a guy who, when he has 2 strikes, chokes up.
Changes his stance.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how he hits when he's got that right foot kind of turned backward.
Well, he kind of puts like a little bit of torque into it. I mean, he really gets a lot of his power out of just his hips, and I mean, he's incredible.
If I could pick any player in today's game to start my team, I'm not sure if I take Soto or Acuna, but it'd be one of those 2.
They say Juan Soto's statistical comparison right now is Ted Williams.
Who?
Ted Williams. Yeah.
Is he good?
He's okay. He's done a few things in his career. Some people think that Ted Williams is the greatest hitter of all time. Who do you think is the greatest hitter of all time in baseball?
Ruth.
Babe Ruth.
Yeah. Babe Ruth's lifetime batting average is 342. Williams is 344. Not much difference. However, you got it. Well, you don't have to, but you really should take the stadiums into account. Ruth was batting down a right field line at 296, I think it was.
Yeah.
It was short to right field in old Yankee Stadium, whereas in Fenway, it's only like 300 feet to the foul pole, but it drops off very fast.
It gets to like 380 once you get to...
Yeah, like 20 feet inside the foul pole, it's to 380. Mm-hmm. And you got to wonder how many home runs Williams would have hit in Yankee Stadium and how many Ruth would have hit in Fenway. And then also in old Yankee Stadium, it was 357 to the left field power or left center power alley. Joe DiMaggio was hitting to there.
Mm-hmm.
How many home runs would he have hit if he had been in Fenway with the Green Monster? And one of the things I like about baseball is that there's no standardization in the fields. They're more standardized than they used to be.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think there can be, because I've been asked the question before, well, why don't they all have a standard field? Well, I mean, depending on where you're playing, the ball is going to travel differently. I mean, obviously the extreme case of it is Colorado, where Colorado has the biggest stadium by far in MLB, and every year they lead the league in home runs. I mean, it's just a ginormous stadium, but and that's one cool thing about baseball. Last one before we go, you were here when Camden Yards was built.
Yes.
It's really one of the first. It was really one of the first modern baseball stadiums, and a lot of teams wanted to kind of base their stadiums off that. What was it like when it was built? And do you remember your first time going to Camden Yards?
Yeah, I had gone to Memorial. I moved here in '87, and I'd gone to Memorial Stadium a number of times. I liked Memorial Stadium because other than opening day, any game I could go there, plunk down my 475, and get into the bleachers. I'm part Scot. I can't help it. With the yard, my wife and son and I think he was still sub-1, went thinking, well, we'll just get in the bleachers. We got there and said, oh, you get these $25 seats and you're lucky to have two of them together.
No.
But I think Camden Yard is a really nice stadium. It was the first so-called new retro stadium.
No.
It has that old-time look about it. I think that the warehouse is a very interesting feature. I think there are a lot of nice stadiums around. I was in Globe Life 2 years ago. It's a nice stadium.
Now they're getting a new one.
And now they're getting a new one. And my friend Tim House, who I talked about earlier, said, give me $500 million. I'll figure out how to make this stadium cool.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're doing. They just want an indoor stadium.
Well, I mean, that's the one thing about Texas is there's been players who legitimately just come visit there for the 3 or 4 game series, and they're always like, how do players play here for an entire season? Because it gets really hot in the summer.
They just do it. You drink a lot. I mean, think of people in the Tour de France. They don't say, oh, it's hot today, we're going to have to do this inside. No. It's raining, the weather's terrible, the weather's really hot. They just
but it's not only unbearable for some of the players, it's unbearable for fans too. I mean,
man up.
Do you think the Vikings should still play outside? I know you're a Vikings fan. Do you think they should still be playing outside? They did for a couple of years. They played that extraordinarily cold playoff game against Seattle.
Yeah, I think games. I've been in 2 dome stadiums. I've seen a game at the Metrodome. I saw a game at the Kingdome, and to me the game seems different. Yeah. And it seems like it's smaller, but I look at the signs on the distances to the fences, and think, well, it's not smaller, but it just seems smaller.
It seems a little more compact. I will say, I went to Marlins Park once, and I truly felt like I was in a spaceship.
Is that a good thing?
No.
Oh, okay.
It felt so foreign to me because the roof was closed. There's like fish tanks in the stadium. It was echoing and quiet. It felt unfamiliar, to say the least. But do you have a favorite stadium that you've been to in your life, or when it comes to baseball?
I guess probably Camden Yard.
Camden Yards.
Yeah. The fact that I can't plunk down 475, of course, this was 30 years ago. Yeah. Can't plunk down 475 and get to the bleachers. Well, that's a curmudgeon sort of thing. I'm kind of hanging on to that. I need to let it go.
No. Well, Dean, I thank you for joining me.
There's one name I want to bring up.
No problem.
I know very little about hockey, but I know about Wayne Gretzky. And I think when he was playing hockey, I think he was the world's greatest athlete. Mm-hmm. And my measuring stick is he stood farther above his peers in those days than any other athlete that I've ever seen.
I think the one thing with Wayne Gretzky is that when we talk about the greatest of all time in a lot of sports, there's usually a heavily debated list of people. I think when it comes to hockey, and I don't pretend to be a hockey expert, everyone almost universally agrees that Wayne Gretzky is the greatest hockey player of all time. basketball, there's a big debate. Football, even when it comes to quarterbacks, baseball, there's a big debate. With hockey, it's just Wayne Gretzky because he was just beyond dominant in his sport. Like, to be able to comprehend how dominant he was, it would be as if a baseball player hit 1,000 home runs in their career.
I think that's an appropriate analogy. I mean, I've looked, I don't remember them anymore, but I've looked at his career stats, and his goals and assists are so far beyond what anybody else has done. It's just amazing.
And it's just an incredible athlete. Played for different franchises too. But yeah, it's someone who is really truly seen as the only GOAT of his sport.
The great one.
Yes. Well, Dean, I thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
It has been a
fun.
pleasure. It's always nice talking to you, as always. And
history, the history curmudgeon.
Yes, and you know what? We disagree on some things, we agree on some things, but at the end of the day, sports fans have a lot more in common than they think they do.
That's true.
I thank you for joining me, Dean.
Thank you, Jamie.
No problem. Thank you guys for watching this. This has been Siettmann Sports. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Siettmann Sports, and have a great day.